Greetings and welcome to our session today, where we will be exploring how co-creating can help us unlock inclusive adaptation and resilience research. I'm Shanaz Musa, one of the directors at South North. We are not-for-profit based in Cape Town, and I will be providing some opening thoughts. In the session today, we will start with some thoughts from me on the topic of co-creation. This will be followed by some reflections from the virtual audience. The heart of the session will be a panel discussion where we'll have 4 panelists that will be going through sharing how they have been using various co-creation approaches and how this has helped them to foster inclusive practices. It is always invaluable to learn from others that are grappling with making adaptation and resilience work more inclusive and lived experiences, which is why we're speaking to panelists from different sectors. The 4 panel members are sharing learnings from work that they have done through funding provided by the CLARE program, the Adaptation Research Alliance, as well as from one of the affiliates of Slum Dwellers International, and they are based in Zambia. There are a variety of contexts that will come to the front because each of these programs are working within these contexts. And I think this will give a tangible sense of the benefits of inclusive co-creation processes that result in a sense of belonging for those who are part of the process. Over the past 2 years, the Adaptation Research Alliance has supported grassroots micro-grantees and interventions for research into action projects. And these have been on a range of very, very topical issues across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. These micro grants have fostered deep collaborative research processes for communities and researchers to explore appropriate responses as a collective. You will have the privilege of hearing from one of these awardees, the Women's Life Wellness Foundation. I just want to stop there because somebody's mic seems to be on. So if I can ask you, to please, if you don't mind, to please turn it off. And then for those of you who haven't yet heard about the CLARE program, it's been going for just over a year now. It is a flagship research program on climate adaptation and research. It's currently funded by UK Aid through the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office that we all know as FCDO, and it's co-funded by the International Development Research Centre, IDRC, based in Canada. CLARE What CLARE is trying to achieve is extremely ambitious, but really very much needed. And it's about bridging this critical gap between science and action. And it's doing this by championing Southern leadership to enable socially inclusive and sustainable actions to build resilience to climate change and natural hazards. Currently, there are 19 research projects that are funded, as well as 6 projects focused on capacity strengthening. Cross-CLARE collaboration is supported through dedicated hubs. One of these is the Research for Impact Hub, which is led by us at South North, and that one of my colleagues leads, Suzanne Carter, and I'll hand over to her later. The CLARE research takes a very strong transdisciplinary approach. And each of these 19 projects actually tackles the issues of inequality, gender, and inclusion. And I think at the core of it, we're looking at injustice as well. On to slide 5, please. Right. So what I'd like us to actually do now is to just think about why is there this need to co-create? And to just reflect that actually co-creation helps us to solve complex problems within complex and often chaotic systems, and that research alone cannot solve this. Co-creation it requires of us to grapple with other knowledge, abilities, context, and cultures, and to really be able to get to the root of issues and problems and create cooperative and often collaborative platforms to explore issues, identify solutions, and even deliver actions in a partnership manner. And this very much speaks to what we feel strongly about, which is Southern leadership. Next slide. So by including a range of people that represent a range of sectors, disciplines, and a range of even decision-making levels from the grassroots right up to national government, we need to recognize that they also come with different needs, incentives, knowledge, values, languages, and also challenges. And navigating these complex groups requires effective communication, respect for differences, and a lot of trust. So the most important outcome of the trust building phase with a wider group is to agree on shared goals. And as we go into the next session, I'd like us to just keep that in mind, the trust building and the shared goals. And then I thought I would like to end off with what the benefits of these inclusive approaches are. And co-creation is one of them. There are other inclusive approaches as well, but the focus of this session is on co-creation. Firstly, it is that by involving people in the process, you create a sense of belonging and ownership. Through building trust in the process, there is a clear understanding of what everyone is trying to do and why it is important. It is you also lay the basis for making sure that everyone is mindful of intentions that underlie the process. And it's not something imposed on you or recommended, but rather something that you are part of creating and building towards. Secondly, the co-creation approach can help identify the root issues and whether there is willingness to tackle these issues, especially of inequality, and to tackle them directly. And lastly, co-creation processes provide, or it should actually provide, benefit to all those involved. And what I mean by this is that everyone should be learning. We should all be able to truly see the benefits at the end of the process, not only the researchers getting a paper published or the government officials getting a policy in place, but everyone involved should realize a benefit. And by meeting these collective needs, we are more likely to sustain interest by all of those involved and start shifting a very skewed power dynamic that often arises. Community voices are also not homogenous, so making sure that we bring in the different needs and perspectives is really important to avoid only some benefiting from the process, but also to ensure that the results are sustainable and embedded in the long term. With this, we'd like to hear what you think about co-creation, what your experiences have been, But I'd like to hand over now to my colleague, Dr. Suzanne Carter. I'm looking for Suzanne. Oh, there.
Hi, Shanaz.
Yes, who will present you with 2 questions that you can engage with. Over to you, Suzanne.
Thanks very much, Shanaz. So we're going to ask you to just go into your mobile device or whatever kind of mobile device you have, either a laptop or a cell phone, and type in menti.com. And then the passcode, which I'm hoping that they're going to put into the chat as well, is 53524246. So if that can be put into the chat as well, please. That will take you to menti.com, where we're inviting you to answer 2 different questions. So the first one is, what does meaningful inclusion mean to you? And the second one is, what makes you feel included? And we really wanted to get your feel as the audience for what it is that this topic brings out and brings to the surface for you, because we're all coming from different perspectives and different backgrounds. There's no right or wrong answers for this. It's just, we'd really love to hear what you have to say. If the technology can be enabled to switch to the Menti feedback slide, we'll do that in a moment, but I'll just repeat the code. You go to menti.com and the passcode is 53524246. You can see it there on the screen as well, at the top of the screen. So far, no one's been brave enough to put forward their views. I really do welcome you to give it a go. And just to reflect on, while we're waiting on what Shanaz has been saying, we have a really great panel discussion coming up after this, which will dive into the specifics. So I think Shanaz has given us a really good theoretical overview of why these 2 issues really go hand in hand, co-creation and inclusion. It's a really fantastic participatory method to enable inclusion. So the first response, what does it mean to you for inclusion to be meaningful? Being heard. That's great. Thank you so much, and very relevant in this virtual system we can still be heard through different kinds of channels. So for someone else, it's that there is absolutely no discrimination. Great. Yeah, I think that's really helpful. I think it's quite hard to sometimes ensure, but it's something that we should all be aspiring to. Being represented. Yes. So yeah, making sure that different constituencies, different kinds of needs and knowledge and backgrounds, contexts are all there to be able to jointly solve problems together. I'll just give another minute for anyone else who would like to share their ideas. Here we go. Being understood. Yeah. That really resonates with me as well. And a lot of the time we find that it's not just, one community needing to understand the other. It's both ways. So often scientists speak in a lot of jargon, and then the community maybe doesn't understand what they're saying, but also from maybe a community speaks multiple languages, there needs to be interpreter services. So often it's creating a joint understanding is actually really challenging and very important. Having been given the agency to act, yes, I love it. Great. And space for expression, participating with a vote, yeah, and being able to express in my own ways. Oh, there's lots coming in now, so fantastic. Thanks very much, everyone, for embracing the tech. Inclusion is where participants decide what the project outcome should be. Yeah, so not coming in with too much predetermined. Someone is not on mute. If they could just go back onto mute, please. There's quite a lot of echo. And making the process equitable and unbiased. Can we let everyone feel that their voice is being heard and that their decisions are given value? Great. Khaleesa, I'm going to ask you to go to the next question and get a bit of feedback. I'm not sure who it is who is unmuted, but yeah, I think you've unmuted yourself now. Thank you very much. So yeah, this might seem a similar question, but it's really a more personal reflection. What is it that makes you feel included? Maybe it's that there's a nice, comfortable space to meet in. Maybe it's that there's friends to meet in the space. Maybe that it's that people speak the same language as you. What is it that helps you to feel included? When my opinion is asked for and not assumed. I like that. Yeah. And so creating those spaces for everyone's opinions to come to the surface, it does take time, but it's really valuable to make sure that we're all on the same page and that we all understand where each other are coming from. Freedom, yeah, that's great. Freedom to express yourself, freedom to be yourself in this space. And my voice is truly heard and my insights are valued in decision making. I think that's what we all hope for in these processes. So yeah, that's a really good one. Okay, just give it another minute or so and then we'll move on to the panel. But these responses will be available afterwards in case you'd like to see what others are thinking. You can see them on the menti.com link. There's one more there. When my opinion is valued, even when there is no agreement. Yeah, so often we won't all have the same opinions, but making sure that we're on the same page about where those differences are can be very helpful. Being understood and the opportunity to speak at length, and that my time is valued. Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. Incorporating views. These are all really wonderful reflections from the audience. So thank you very much for providing those. We'll also ask you at the end to give us a final reflection. So don't lose that menti.com link. I'm now going to hand over to the panel discussion portion of the session, where we have 4 really fantastic speakers who are going to be sharing some of their on-the-ground experience with you. I'm going to introduce them one at a time, and each one will give a short overview of the work that they're doing and give you a bit of context about who they are and what they're up to. We'll start with McTavish. McTavish is a professional photographer and editor who was trained by Slum Dwellers International. He's an active federation member from the Zambia Youth Federation, who leads the Know Your City TV segment, which has been on a number of TV programs in Zambia. Over to you, McTavish, to introduce yourself further. McTavish, are you there? I see you on the screen, but I see your camera's off at the moment. I think he's actually just dropped off. That's very unfortunate. Shall we then ask Dr. Grace Olukwai to introduce herself first then? Dr. Grace is an environmentalist and urban planner who teaches environmental management at the Leeds City University in Ibadan, Nigeria. Her research focuses on climate extremes and environmental governance, urban infrastructure planning, climate adaptation and social change, environmental resource stewardship, and gender social inclusion, with a special interest in through all of that on water issues. She is the co-principal investigator for the CLARE research project called Palm Trees. Over to you, Grace, to introduce yourself further.
Okay, Suzanne, thank you very much. I'm trying to on my camera from here. Maybe you can do it from your hand. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of the discussion. I'm Grace Olukwai. I'm a professor at Leeds City University, where I teach environmental management with focus on extreme events and environmental governance. I use gender and social inclusion framework for most of my analysis to explain adaptation in terms of the impacts across different social identities in the society, and also to look at who is benefiting from climate adaptation policy in terms of power dynamics, and what are the impacts of all this in terms of sustaining adaptation knowledge, adaptation actions, especially at community level. So this is what I do. The invitation to come to this panel discussion this afternoon, I'm here on behalf of Palm Trees. Palm Trees is acronyms for Pan-African Interdisciplinary Lens on the Margin, where we are trying to look at how do we tackle the extreme events. It's a project that cuts across 6 countries in the sub-Saharan Africa. We have Nigeria, South Africa, Congo, Cameroon, Ghana, and yes, Ghana, 6 of us, and about 18 institutions came together. In our project, we are trying to look at extreme events, which are 3, flooding, drought, and heat waves. We are trying to is in terms of livelihoods, public health and wellness, and we are trying to see this vis-a-vis gender lens, multidisciplinary lens also, to see at the end of the day, how do we bring about a kind of capacity building for communities to become resilient to extreme weather events, and also for institutional support, especially for communities where the vulnerable groups are already been trapped in poverty and marginalization. So this is what I do for now, and I appreciate you for the opportunity to be part of the discussion this afternoon.
Thanks very much, Grace. Do keep trying to put your camera on if possible, but otherwise we'll carry on. I'm going to then hand back to McTavish, who wanted to show a video, so I'm hopeful that that's still possible from the organisers, if you can queue up that. McTavish, over to you.
Suzanne, McTavish hasn't been able to join back in.
Sorry. I'm sorry. It's just a static image. Okay, sorry. I thought he was there. Yes, I think maybe just play it, and then hopefully when he's able to rejoin us, then we can hear from him as well.
Thank you.
In my tribal language, we say, "Gulo yangu zugu bendelezi mumasena mobazwa." I am a local actor. I am affected and infected by climate change daily. I am forced to wait for my leaders to find possible solutions where they don't really know what's on the ground because they don't stay quiet. I know the vulnerability of my community, so on behalf of my society, I ask, can power be shifted to local actors to find possible solutions about climate change? You see, my understanding is deeper than your thinking because in Velani, it's like body kwatu when it floods, we sleep standing as we wait for the authorized authorities to find solutions, or let's say come to our aid. We know our problems and we have our solutions. Let me simplify this. Funds aren't directly handed to us, as they say, it's a protocol. We move to highlands just like the Litunga Kwatini Kukomboka ceremony. And here's something funny. When drought comes, they bring water tanks and fill them with water the first 2 to 3 weeks, then let us dehydrate, forgetting that our lives are not Katunya Rango. With all the damages caused, said and done, being put in a position of depending on politicians for survival, I once again plead on behalf of my community, the ones that face the direct impact of climate change. Can power be shifted to local actors in the climate space?
Involved with producing, to just give you a flavour of the kind of work that they're doing with communities on the ground. Next, I'll hand then to introduce herself is Professor Liv Stevens. She's a Professor of Climate Risks and Resilience at the Department of Meteorology at the University of Reading, but she also holds a joint position with the Red Cross Red Crescent's Climate Centre, where she serves as their science lead. Liz's projects span across multiple countries, leveraging her expertise on hydromet hazards to improve climate emergency responses and risk management. She is the PI for the CLARE Research Project Inflow. Over to you, Liz.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. So the Inflow project is about the improved anticipation of floods on the White Nile. So the countries we focus on are Uganda and South Sudan. This is one of the smaller CLARE projects, and I actually co-lead the project with Mohammed Hassan at ICPAC, which is the Climate Predictions and Application Centre for the IGAD region. So within this project, it has a very heavy science focus, but it is transdisciplinary research as well. We're trying to better understand and predict flooding on the Nile River sections in Uganda and South Sudan, and particularly the flooding that affects so many people within the Sud wetlands in South Sudan. So the research project includes Makerere University in Uganda, the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Centre, of which I'm part of course, the Uganda Red Cross Society, the Uganda Ministry of Water and Environment, and the South Sudan Ministry of Irrigation. And we have many other project partners as well who we work with, including Médecins Sans Frontières and Google, who provide in-kind support as additional project partners. So the aim of this project came about as a result of that worst flooding within living memory, and memories go back quite far in South Sudan, as perhaps I'll come back to later. So it affected over 835,000 people from 2021 and peaking in 2022, and this flooding was affecting communities who were already displaced by conflict. And anticipatory humanitarian action in that country was very limited by the limited skill of hydrological forecasts. So this was the primary focus, is that we wanted to be able to improve the science in a much understudied region so that we could provide improved forecasting systems in future. And so our aim is to deliver a step change in our ability to anticipate flooding, but its impacts as well. So we have social scientists at Makerere University who are working in refugee settings in northern Uganda, working on research questions that address the impacts of flooding on the communities that have ended up fleeing to Uganda as a result of the flooding. And also working with MSF, who are undertaking research in locations around their field hospitals in South Sudan. So it really is collaborative and transdisciplinary scientific research. So it's between the mandated government agencies, the regional forecasting bodies, academic institutions, and humanitarian partners. And obviously there are many challenges associated with working in a conflict-affected setting. I think that's probably the best introduction to the project for now. I'm sure we'll come back to many things later. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Liz. And yeah, really great to hear a bit more about the important work you're doing in South Sudan. Mazingo, I'm going to hand over to you next to introduce yourself. Mazingo Botha is currently acting in the role of the Executive Director of the Women's Life and Wellness Foundation, where she leads initiatives focused on social accountability and sustainable development. She has a degree in microbiology, which brings a unique perspective to advocacy for women's rights, social and economic justice, youth and women's empowerment, and climate action. The Women's Life and Wellness Foundation were the recipients of an Adaptation Research Alliance microgrant earlier this year, and so she'll be sharing some of the insights from some of that work as well. Over to you, Mazingo.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. It is a privilege to be part of this panel today, where we can explore the vital themes of inclusiveness and co-creation in our work. So at Women's Life and Wellness Foundation, our mission revolves around advancing women's rights and climate action, improving reproductive health rights, and advocating for social and economic justice. We believe that real progress can only be achieved when we create inclusive spaces that amplify diverse voices, that is joint value. So one of our significant initiatives is the establishment of a community seed bank under the support of the Adaptation Research Alliance. This project, which is community-driven, aims to enhance seed sovereignty and food security, as well as empower local farmers by preserving indigenous seeds and promoting sustainable agroecological practices. The community members embarked on the establishment of the community seed bank, and we played the role of ensuring that their knowledge and cultural heritage are recognized and valued, fostering a sense of ownership and responsibility. So additionally, our engagement with a legally local financing mechanism by an act of parliament under the Local Government Act of Zambia, 1995, known as the Constituency Development Fund, has been instrumental in promoting inclusivity. We've worked diligently to connect community members with CDF resources, enabling them to advocate for funding that directly addresses their needs through a bottom-up approach. Co-creation is central to our approach as Women's Life and Wellness Foundation. It's about building trust and fostering relationships with the communities we serve, actively listening to their needs and tailoring our interventions according to what the community actually is intending to do. So by involving these communities in our projects, we not only empower individuals, but also enhance the authenticity and sustainability of projects. As we move forward in our discussion today, I encourage each one of us to reflect on how we can further enhance inclusiveness in our developmental initiatives, how we can leverage the power of co-creation to ensure that everyone, particularly the most vulnerable in our communities, have a seat at the table and a voice in shaping our collective future. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the valuable insights that we will share together.
Thanks so much, Mazingo, for that introduction. Really great to hear about the work that you're doing in Zambia. I am going to sort of ask 5 different questions, and I'll pitch these to different panel members based on what their interest and expertise is about. But I think I might start with one that's a bit more broad about what strategies and tips would you recommend to improve the inclusiveness of a co-creation process, drawing on sort of the experiences that you have in your different contexts. Maybe we could start with Grace. Grace, if you're there, if you could just unmute yourself. Okay, I'm going to then hand over to Mazingo. Maybe you want to give this one the first go.
Okay, thank you so much. I think one of the strategies that we would use is creating a safe and respectful environment, because this is able to foster inclusive and non-judgmental spaces. You want people to be able to express themselves without feeling judged or not understood or not accepted, especially those from marginalized communities. So set the ground rules for respectable communication and designate neutral facilitators to manage discussions and mediate conflicts. Maybe another thing that I could point out is strengthening the capacity of participants, you know, in various processes and programs. Providing training, information or resources to empower participants, particularly those that are less experienced in the co-creation process, so they can contribute meaningfully, you know, identify any knowledge gaps to ensure that when a topic is being discussed, people can fully engage. So maybe those two are some of the strategies that I think would work well in improving inclusiveness of co-creation process. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mazingo. I think that really resonates with me. So that safe space and also the facilitation to allow for the, you know, helping people to really get to what the most important issues are. I think that we're having technical problems with both Grace and McTavish, unfortunately. Liz, would you like to come in on this question as well, or should we move on to the next one?
I think I could talk a little bit about one of the next questions that you have,
Okay,
Suzanne, if you want
sure,
to move on.
no problem. As I said, I'm hoping that McTavish and Grace are back with us very soon, but at the moment they're not there. So the second question I had then was more to sort of power dynamics and how those can often undermine our sort of inclusive intentions. So maybe if you could just explain what has been the challenges that you've had to manage with in terms of power dynamics, Liz, in terms of the conflict situation in Sudan. I can imagine that is quite tricky.
Sure. I think one of the key power dynamics that we have to recognize to start off with is we're trying to support the organizations undertake anticipatory action. So trying to make decisions before a disaster occurs. And anticipatory action, the financing and the planning of it is something that's been developed by the humanitarian community, but at an international level. So we need to recognise that it isn't really designed as something that is catch-all, and it doesn't necessarily work in contexts like South Sudan, where there is a state of protracted conflict and flooding that is very different to flooding anywhere else in the world, in that it can last several years. And so we really need to recognise that the way things work at the moment in terms of anticipatory action can't necessarily work in that context. And I think what has been a really an unfortunate thing that's happened this year is that we've seen record lake levels in Lake Victoria, and that we knew that was going to lead to more flooding again. It's happened quite early in the project, so we weren't ready with all of our solutions that we perhaps hoped to have. But what it has given us an opportunity to do is be part of the conversations and hear the decisions that are being made in the country. So we've been invited to present to the flood task force to give our sort of expertise on what the forecasts are saying and what we think is going to happen, which hopefully we're offering something as part of that. But really, that flood task force as well has given us an opportunity to hear all of the different questions that are coming in from different partners who are working across the country, and by listening to those challenges that they're facing, it's helped us to inform how we prioritize what the science will be. So I think that has been a really important part of the process. But I would also like to think about the power imbalances in science itself and how they manifest, especially in somewhere like South Sudan. So the project was really set up to address some of that in a way, because we know that it's a very understudied region of the world, and the changes that we'll see as a result of climate change are not very well understood in the country either. So that, you know, that's already something that we're hoping to address. But obviously, I'm sitting in the comfort of my home office in Reading and have never been to South Sudan, so we need to recognise that, of course, as well. But also there are challenges in terms of access to data, in terms of computing, in terms of expertise that we need to be aware of. Things like where hydrological and meteorological data is collected tends to focus more on urban areas and perhaps not in the locations where people are most vulnerable to the impacts of the flooding and the conflict. And there are various ways that we're trying to tackle that. We're going to end up with placements at ICPAC from the scientists from the water ministry in South Sudan and in Uganda, so that we can they can pass on their expertise to us on the local hydrology, and we can over an extended period of time share the knowledge that has been developed over the project. But also something I'm really excited with at the moment is that we've been using the experience of MSF as sort of local citizen scientists on gathering data from the places that they're working, the field hospitals, and that is something that we're hoping to expand now, so we can gain more information on the hydrology in those rural settings where we don't have what we might call as scientists the sort of formal data, but is still data that's useful for us to understand how people are being impacted and when, so that we might be able to support them better in future, and not just focusing on those areas where we can, developing a model for Juba, for example, which would be easier because that's where the data is. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Liz. And I know that you've also mentioned that, for example, that through this consultation, for example, you've changed the frequency of when the forecast needs to be provided, or when exactly the timing needs to be. And so how some of these sort of very specific decision points and when data is needed and what can be done is sort of quite important to make sure that people are getting what they need at the right time. And yeah, just truly inspiring work that you're doing there. Grace, I think you're back. I saw you on your camera. If you are there, we are currently just addressing the question about power dynamics and how those can undermine our inclusive intentions. So I'm going to ask you, if possible, to maybe comment on, what have been the challenges to managing power dynamics in your context. If you can unmute yourself, Grace, then at the top of the screen, just press the unmute button, and we should be able to hear you. Are you there? Okay, I'm sorry, but I don't think Grace is able to unmute at the moment. Yeah, if you can just try and press the unmute button, then we can bring you in when you're ready, Grace. And McTavish is unfortunately still also offline. The same question to you, Mazingo, about power dynamics. Would you be able to come in on that?
Sure. Maybe just in addition to what Liz spoke to, I think I'll speak in the context of what we have experienced on the ground in a number of spaces because of the deep-rooted patriarchy. There's been a lot of tokenism. You find women are given opportunities to be on maybe a board, or they are allowed to be part of an important committee that makes important decisions. And they are just there to balance up the genders, not necessarily to have a voice and actually speak out. So whatever it is that they say is said and ends there. It's not valued. It's not included in whatever final decisions are made. So if somebody asks if there is any gender imbalance or imbalances in opportunities coming from the women and the men, based on the fact that there's a woman or there are women represented on that platform, they'll say there isn't any imbalance. But in actual sense, you find that it's very difficult for women's voices to be heard. And I think as a result of that, we actually went on to, we've continued to just carry out a lot of sensitization around the inequalities that exist as a result of the deep-rooted traditional and cultural norms here in our country. So we take our time to build the capacities of women, as is our name, Women's Life and Wellness Foundation. We're trying by all means to, just strengthen their capacities. They already have a voice, but for it to be heard, they need to be given platforms. They need to be educated on how they can be effective in those platforms, because sometimes you could speak, but you're not being effective. And that is our role as Women's Life and Wellness Foundation. Sometimes there's a lot of resistance to shared power between the men and the women. The men always want to be in charge. The men always want to, be the ones to handle everything. But I think from what we have researched and what we continue to learn is that even the way we respond to being resilient as people has actually a background of whether or not we are going to even have the opportunity to, speak out, have a voice out there. Sometimes people don't have resources. They have not attained an education. So you find that illiteracy actually plays a huge role in these in issues of power dynamics. So I think from our end, that's something that I could add, and it's something that we continue to sensitize on, to talk about, so that both men and women get to learn and know the importance of being inclusive in.
That's great. Thanks, Mazingo. I think, really giving some real life to those dynamics that we often as women experience, and it's the hard work it is to chip away at those power dynamics and to make spaces for women to not just be present but actually heard, and changing the norms of that. It's obviously very challenging, but great to hear your reflections on where that's happening. Grace, I see you, and I see you're not muted, so please go ahead with sharing your reflections on how you're dealing with power dynamics.
Hello, Suzanne.
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, okay, great. I think it's really heavily at my hand, and I could barely hear the conversation. But at the beginning of the meeting, I remember you were raising the question on what is co-creation to us vis-a-vis the projects we are handling now. For me, co-creation is all about harnessing the potential of different groups of the society to bring about a sustainable climate adaptation. So I see it as an opportunity for practitioners, scientists, communities, policymakers, development actors to come together to define what the problem is based on the context, and also to design the solutions and to implement the agreeable solution. So that is co-creation in the way I've seen it and in the way I've been using it over the years. So creation is about giving value to people, giving values to the experiences communities are going through, giving values to their knowledge and allowing their knowledge to be part of the decision making. Before now, scientists will come up with idea and policymakers will just okay it. But when it gets to the community for implementation, you will discover that the communities may not be able to absorb it. And even when they absorb it, they may not be able to sustain it because it is not in line, it is not in alignment with their value system. So co-creation of knowledge is all about embracing the peculiarities of communities and working with them for equitable participation. They must be heard, they must be valued, and they must be part of the decision making. When we do that, it is certain that climate adaptation will be sustainable. And instead of having new framework all the time, we will know the one that is functioning and that is adaptable to specific social group in the community. So if I may just summarize it, co-creation of knowledge is all about reducing barriers that is against the barriers against climate adaptation at community level. At national level, we can make decisions, but when community actions are not there, it can never be sustainable. So co-creation of knowledge will remove that barrier and it will allow the community to embrace and also work together with whatever policy that is coming on the table. They will see it as their own idea. They will be able to embrace it and they will see to the implementation and even sustainable or sustainability of such a policy. So this is what co-creation is all about. We are removing barriers and we are making the communities to know that we are all together in this what I call plural, a kind of pluralized and compound crisis of climate. Once they are part of the discussion from the beginning, I can tell you that they will have the joy of even submitting and contributing their own quota, which at the end of the day will help to sustain adaptation and resiliency agenda. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Grace, and that's really great to get your take on what the co-creation process is all about. I might ask you to follow up with just some thoughts about do you think that inclusion issues might be different in an African context or in your own context compared to others in terms of cultural barriers or gender norms that Mazingo has been touching on. So are you noticing that there are sort of some other factors that maybe are unique to African contexts that you would like to highlight? Oh, I think we have Grace gone off camera again, so I think maybe she's not there. It seems she's having some problem with the connection due to the bad weather where she is. I then think that I might hand over to Mzingo to tell us a little bit more about, bring out the same question. If you just want to go into a bit more detail about, whether you think there are particular norms in Africa that are making problems for us to have these co-creation spaces. And in my own experience, I know a lot of people have reflected that many times the interaction tends to be very hierarchical in some places, especially in West and East Africa, where it's seen as rude to interrupt someone, or someone more senior, or someone if you're a woman, to interrupt a male, and all of those things can cause real difficulties in just communicating, let alone co-creating. Do you want to share some thoughts in terms of anything that you've come across in terms of specific challenges?
Yes. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I think your image might be frozen.
But... Okay, thank you. So, yeah, indeed, like I earlier mentioned, there's deep-rooted patriarchy and cultural norms here in Africa that sometimes hinder and could give a different perspective when it comes to addressing challenges as a result of the dynamics that are here in Africa. So yes, there are scenarios where it may be looked at as disrespectful if a woman has to speak out in front of maybe a dialogue meeting where men are a part of. In our own experience as women's life, whenever we've had meetings, especially in the beginning of our implementation on the ground, we have had very few women participating and saying anything in some meetings. A whole session could go by 1 hour and it will only be men speaking. And what that meant is not that women did not have an opinion, or that they could not understand what the discussion was, but what was behind it was the norm that when men and women are seated together in a meeting, it is not for women to speak, it is for men to speak. And because of that, it is difficult for a woman to have challenges that she faces be addressed because she can't speak for herself. A man will speak in his own context and speak on his own behalf and probably be able to represent fellow men. But for a woman, because she's not given that opportunity to speak, it makes it difficult for all women in that particular setting to see the change that they would like to see. And so because of that, there were those challenges, but it had to take, several strategies. For example, we had to separate groups where we would have women speaking on their own and men having their own meetings, so that we explain to the women and they're able to look at that as a safe space where amongst themselves as women, they're able to speak out. And we also sit with the men and explain to them that these are your partners in change. These are your partners in development. And if there is going to be any impact that you should be able to see from the works that you will do, you need to work together. And so even when we speak about, because when you talk about a lot of issues around the climate, we have gotten to understand that even the way we get affected is different as women compared to the men. And so, having them understand all those dynamics meant, having various strategies that would begin to break down some of these cultural understandings. So really, indeed, from the African context, it is it is different. And because of that, it's very important to always have an understanding of the community and how and the setup before an intervention comes in. And that is why I believe it's very, very important for these discussions on inclusion and co-creation, because what that means is we are picking the voice from the community and understanding exactly what they need, whether it's a woman or a man, and then including that in whatever intervention that we are bringing to them. That will really help us to, come up with something that is even more sustainable, because it is coming from the community itself, from the marginalized person, from the marginalized group of people. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thanks so much for illustrating those points so well. And really, it hits home some of the things that I've sort of experienced and seen as well, where, as you say, you have to create separate spaces to have the difficult conversations, get to the real meat of the issues, and then bring people back together. And other techniques that we've used is sort of actually limiting people and their ability to speak, and giving everyone an equal share of the time, so that everyone, say, gets 2 minutes to give their input, and everybody has to speak, which works in some settings, but may not in all. And I think that's the thing, we always need to be cognizant of will this technique work in this particular context. The sort of bridges to the next question I had, which is, are there any safety concerns that you might have to managing inclusion? As you said, like having these separated spaces can be a way to address safety concerns if women feel safe to speak. But I mean, I think there's even been more direct examples of possible spin-offs of gender-based violence due to the issues that are being discussed, and that actually you feel like you're bringing an issue to the table and having a healthy conversation, but it goes home to less healthy dynamics. Would any of you like to jump in on that question? Maybe Liz, would you like to talk about that? I mean, with the refugee situation and refugee camps in South Sudan, I can imagine that there are some of those kinds of concerns.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main safety concerns are for our researchers on the project, and that means that we're not able to travel within South Sudan ourselves. So obviously we have to reflect on that as a key concern. The way that we approach that is to work through humanitarian partners on the ground, and that's why working with MSF has been so valuable, because they obviously have their field hospitals around the country, and they can feed back to us on that. But also within the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, the local chapters of the South Sudan Red Cross and their volunteers as well help to bring through some of the concerns and the impacts that are being experienced in more remote parts of the country. But I guess our real way of dealing with that sort of lack of access is to work within Uganda, in the northern part of Uganda, within those refugee communities. And those refugee communities that are people that have escaped conflict as well, they tend to be overrepresented in the demographic sense by women and children. And so our aim is to work in those communities and be able to pose our research questions to women and child-headed households as well. I think that sort of mixture between those two approaches has perhaps started to identify things that we might want to tackle, and thinking about some of the more taboo topics perhaps as well. So one of the things that MSF were able to report to us was that birth rates within South Sudan were reducing, and so we were starting to talk about perhaps where we're seeing higher rates of miscarriage, and perhaps that is something that women are being affected by and not talking about, so that that's the sort of thing that we might end up tackling within those research questions. And when we think about mental health impacts of flooding, things related to miscarriage might not be something that's actually tackled, but maybe something that we can bring through the project and bring through those voices. I'd add as well that we also have challenges in Uganda with the new Homosexuality Act, which came in at the start, or just as our research was starting up. So we really had to reflect on how we could undertake our research in a way that meant that our researchers were safe, but also the people that we were talking to would would be safe as well. And that was quite a challenge to think about. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Liz, for those reflections. And I think, yeah, you know, the safety is in so many different aspects, and it has so many different outlets, and having to think through all the complexities is really so important, and challenging at the same time. McTavish was with us, and I'm hoping he's still. Oh no, I think his connection is just not sustaining out. He's been in and out. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to ask him that question. But Mazingo, would you like to talk a little bit about this aspect?
Yes. So I think something critical that we have done is to ensure that we identify, local actors that can protect the rights of marginalized individuals or groups, so that, it makes it easy to create that space which is safe. Sometimes when discussions are being held, some people fear because they feel that somebody is going to report them, or somebody will go to their home and maybe they may be attacked, or any of such things. But the reason why that is actually the reason why we have identified people at local level that defend the rights of these people. It's very important to understand that at local level, somebody may not necessarily have money to pay for a court case, all those litigation issues when they're attacked, but they should be able to go to somebody and know that they are safe when they say something or when they speak out on behalf of the community. In the recent past, there were so many stories that you would hear about people that get attacked because of, bringing out their opinion on a particular issue, speaking out, even if it's maybe against something that is happening politically, affecting their economic, stability, affecting their social stability. And so for us, we look for human rights defenders at local level, that whenever somebody or a group of people want to speak out, there is somebody that is ready to defend them and stand with them, helping them to bring out their voice and bring out issues that pertain to their well-being, so that at the end of the day, whatever it is that is supposed to be achieved is achieved for the entire community and not just one secluded group of people. So it's very important for us that we identify those people. And also, in identifying the human rights defenders, we ensure to educate people on, some of these risks of whether it's attack or, backlash. It's very important for people to understand that when you share an opinion, and one that especially is not popular, but is important, there will be people that will come back and say, why did you say that? Why are you speaking out in that manner? And so we educate them on what they could expect and how they could handle that, by not injuring themselves, by making the discussion go south, like making it become sour, but still remain objective in what they're saying. So that's how that's what I can say around that topic.
Thanks so much for going into a little bit more detail on that reflection. And I really liked how you connected to making people aware of what the consequences of what they're saying might be and how they might have to deal with backlash. Because I think if people are informed and know a little bit more in advance, they can hopefully protect themselves better. And yeah, that definitely helps. I am so sorry that McTavish and Grace are both having troubles joining, and they don't seem to be on at the moment. I had a last question was actually mostly for McTavish about bringing in youth perspective. So I'm not sure if either Mazinga or Liz, you wanted to comment on that. Otherwise, we can do some closing reflections and then move on to a sort of a different part of the session. Would either of you like to talk to how to make these spaces more inclusive for youth? I'm picking up that's not where you feel your expertise lies, and yes, McTavish was our guest for that. So then we'll just open to both of you to give a quick reflection as we close the panel discussion. Maybe Liz, we'll go to you first.
Yeah, thank you very much, Suzanne. I think I want to come back to the two things that I mentioned at the start, and I think one of the key parts of the projects that were funded under the CLARE programme was to be able to deliver impact, and for us that meant kind of aligning with these big international initiatives, things like early warnings for all and anticipatory action, because that would be where the financing would come from to deliver that sort of sustained impact long into the future. But it's very important to recognize that these big international programs are not really set up to bring through the experiences that are being felt on the ground by different members of the community. And so it's very important, while reflecting on how we can deliver impact within our research projects and align with what these big initiatives need for us to deliver that, we also need to be advocates for the members of the community that we are talking to, or that our research team are talking to make sure that their needs are being brought through within that sort of pathways to impact kind of way of working in the future. So that's the first thing that we need to reflect on, is trying to get that pathway from those local perspectives all the way through into these big international initiatives. The second thing that I want to mention again is those imbalances within science as well. I'm kind of quite aware that I'm relatively unusual to be a female PI of a project, especially in the science world. My university is very good at it, so I am in this big bubble of having lots of fabulous female professors around me. But as soon as I go to conferences, I know that it's a very male-dominated world. And when we've been thinking about recruiting for the project, we've needed to have that in mind as well. And we've recruited 2 PhD students on the project. We wanted to make sure that they were not, that they were from the countries that are being affected by the flooding, so from Uganda and South Sudan, and obviously trying to make sure that we were interviewing women as well as men, reflecting that maybe the men had the better opportunities to get to the point where they could undertake PhD research. I think we've been very lucky to have the students and the gender balance that we've got among the PhD students, but that's not necessarily the same for everyone. And I think we need to keep on considering who is getting these opportunities and how we improve that in future. And also to reflect always on those imbalances in how that the sort of latest developments in science are coming through. Making sure that we're not only focused on those areas where we can get that nice data that scientists like to work with, but also focusing on the locations where people are perhaps experiencing the worst impacts of the flooding as well. And one of the other things that we're thinking about is how quickly science advances are being brought down to the local level. So there's a lot of buzzwords around AI and machine learning, but for hydrologists, this is very new. It's something that we're working on within the project, but making sure that we bring the scientists from South Sudan and Uganda on that journey with us, so that they are also aware of how these approaches work and how they can implement them as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Liz. That was a great reflection, and really summed up your ideas really well there. I was particularly struck, by your point about trying to get the best talent and recruiting for PhD students. That we really need to be thinking about, well, how do we do this consciously? So it's not going to happen if we don't think about it. We have to plan for it and really push for that change. I see Grace was on, but I'm not sure if she is now. Yes, I think Grace is on. Grace, would you like to come in with your reflections on sort of summing up at the end of this panel discussion? I know you haven't had a chance to talk at all the points that we'd expected. So if you want to touch on any aspects, please go for it.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Susan. Just for me to talk on the challenges against inclusion, especially co-creation of knowledge. We have these cultural norms and myths, which can also be seen in the area of the gender inequalities. Even during the community entries for palm trees project, we realized that there are some communities that women, they are not so comfortable in being at the forefront to talk about what they are going through based on the cultural fabrics. So they would rather say, okay, talk to our men, and whatever our men are saying, we go by it. So this is one of the barriers for inclusion. Even though we want them to be there to speak up, but there's a kind of stronghold in terms of the cultural fabric that will not allow them to speak. Even when you ask them to come as maybe female only for focus group, there's still that body language that they are not willing to participate. And it's just because they don't want to get involved in anything that their men will not accept. So this is one of the barriers. Also, in terms of the national legislation across countries, especially in Africa, there are decisions that have been made without necessarily having public hearing. That they will just fast track the legislation process, and this as a way of impacting inclusion whenever we need it as scientists, as practitioners for co-creation of knowledge. Also, we have the fear of unknown. There are times that communities are not just comfortable relating with development actors or policymakers or even scientists, because they have experiences in the past that are not palatable. And so they have that fear that, oh, maybe they dump us, that they will just get information from us, they use it for their whole scientific profit, and at the end, as a way of limiting participation and inclusion of the people anytime we are having opportunities to engage them. And so even though they need to be there, but they have that fear based on what has happened in the past. So in terms of what else can we do better, at least in creating safety for practitioners, for scientists, for development actors when we are engaging the communities for co-creation of knowledge. One of the things we learned during the inception meetings of palm trees is that community leaders, they have that voice and they have that power to more or less commanding their community members to participate. I remember when we were having the inception meeting in Lagos, that's the capital economic hub for Nigeria. We needed people from the riverine communities, people from the slum to join in the meeting. And because we were able to get their community leaders and they okayed it, it was so easy for some of the community members to be at the meeting, because they just said, oh, since the chief, since the Sheriki, the leaders of our community have already told us that we can be here, we are safe to be here. So in working at safety of science practitioners, development actors, there's that need for us to first gain access and acceptance of contest. Once the leaders of the communities are comfortable, there's every probability that the community members will also be able to get engaged and be able to speak out. So the last question was on participation of the youth. Generally, we have the more than 40% of population of sub-Saharan Africa are youths. And that means that they are huge assets that if we allow them to have a better understanding and having a better engagement with them in the gospel of climate adaptation, they are likely to bring about a sustainable change. If they are also empowered in terms of capacity strengthening, climate information sharing, they're likely to give us a better and a stable engagement with the different spheres of wherever they find themselves. So this is my contribution. Thank you very much, Suzanne and other members of the panel.
Thanks, Grace, for coming in on those points, and glad that we got to hear from you on those. I think I'm then going to quickly hand over to Mazingo to close us out with your final reflections.
I think Professor.
Sorry, Mazingo?
Okay, so I was saying Grace and Liz have said it all, but my addition is when it comes to the youth, I think, you know, they come with the promise of sustainability. Young people are around now, and because they are still growing, we can see that the future will have people that understand what is being discussed now, and that they'll be able to carry the mantle in the future. So if we are able to involve them in this process of co-creation, it means we are talking about sustainability. And really, I think whether it's a project or a discussion that is being had, it's very important that young people are always kept in the loop. Unfortunately, Mark Tavish was not here to speak as a young person, but yeah, I know he would share these sentiments. And also, I'm just grateful for the opportunity to discuss with you know, like-minded people, people that are open to share their experiences. It's really enlightening, and I think my take home is that we need to ensure that we break the barriers that are in between the community and those that are trying to bring up the interventions in the communities. That means that we ensure that from the time of from the point of project design all the way to implementation, they are part of the process. They understand what safety means in the entire process, as well as how they can effectively contribute and have their voices still being heard, being part of the process of growth and development. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ms. Ingo. And I think great to end off on that point about, making sure everyone feels included and making sure that the voices of those who really need to be there are represented. And that kind of ties into some of the reflections that were coming in at the beginning of the session. So I'm going to suggest again that we go to menti.com, and the passcode for this one is 82368152. It'll be up on the screen in front of you as well. And I want you to just give your reflection from the audience. What did you find most inspiring about this discussion to improve inclusion through co-creation? Maybe it sparked a new thought in you or reaffirmed something that you already were thinking, but it'd be just really helpful to get a sense of how this all landed and the discussion from our really rich panel group, what's that sparked in you. So feel free to jot down your thoughts, and we'll have a few moments to look at those. I think while people are just having a moment, I'll just give my closing thoughts just so that we end promptly and on time. So for me, I really think that what this is all underlined is that co-creation works so much better when we strive for inclusion, because we need that diversity of views, we need that diversity of knowledges, and we need to appreciate the diversity of needs. And the second thing that it's really sort of underlined for me is that to create that sense of belonging that Shanaz was talking about in the beginning, we are going to have to disrupt the existing power dynamics and hierarchies and actually tackle some really difficult things. These deep-seated norms that men and women can't necessarily speak in the same room, or that we need to really change up where and how people are allowed to speak and share their views if we want this to really work. And those are tackling quite systemic issues, and gender issues, power issues, and inequality issues that are really important, but really get to the heart of problems as opposed to just looking at superficial bandages. And my last thing I thought I would just maybe touch on is it sparked in me the thought about, there's an African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And I think that really is something that resonates with the co-creation idea, that it may not be a fast process, it may not always be as quick as we'd like, but the richness and the diversity that we get from doing co-creation processes really allows us to get to the root causes of things, really look at the issues that really matter, and really understand what it is that will be most helpful moving forward in a constructive, and maybe there'll be some conflicts along the way as well, but in a space where those conflicts can be aired and can be resolved. I think, there's some ideas coming through from the audience, which is great. So what did you find most inspiring? Avoiding tokenism. Great. Yeah, it's not just okay to tick the box that this person is represented. They have to actually be able to speak. And good to hear the actual experiences from the field. Yeah, I'm glad that was helpful for you. I think it always helps to give real life examples to some of these issues that can seem a bit theoretical sometimes. I don't see any further inputs right now. So I will then, I know we've been told to finish very much on time, so I'm keeping that in mind. This Menti board will still be open if you still want to add your thoughts, but we will stop sharing that. And I just want to say thank you very, very much to our 4 panelists for attending today, for sharing your wisdom, sharing your challenges, sharing the things that you're doing to make the world a better place. And we really do value that. On behalf of SSN as the host for this session, I'd like to thank Shanaz Musa, my director in charge, for her opening remarks, and to the team that's behind the scenes doing things to make sure this all runs smoothly. And thank you very much to the audience as well for joining us to discuss this issue. I wish you all a good day further.